warmth. With the restoration of my bodily powers, my mind became in some degree aware of the universe of misery, henceforth to be its dwelling. I ran to the water's edge, calling on the beloved names. Ocean drank in and absorbed my feeble voice, replying with pitiless roar. I climbed a near tree. The level sands bounded by a pine forest, and the sea clipped round by the horizon, was all that I could discern. In vain I extended my researches along the beach. The mast we had thrown overboard, with tangled cordage and remnants of a sail, was the sole relic land received of our wreck. Sometimes I stood still and wrung my hands. I accused earth and sky, the universal machine, and the almighty power that misdirected it. Again I threw myself on the sands, and then the sighing wind, mimicking a human cry, roused me to bitter, fallacious hope. Assuredly, if any little bark or smallest canoe had been near, I should have sought the savage plains of ocean, found the dear remains of my lost ones, and, clinging round them, have shared their grave. The day passed thus. Each moment contained eternity. Although one hour after hour had gone by, I wondered at the quick flight of time. Yet even now I had not drunk the bitter potion to the dregs. I was not yet persuaded of my loss. I did not yet feel in every pulsation, in every nerve, in every thought, that I remained alone of my race, that I was the last man. The day had clouded over, and a drizzling rain set in at sunset. Even the eternal skies weep, I thought. Is there any shame, then, that mortal man should spend himself in tears? I remembered the ancient fables, in which human beings are described as dissolving away through weeping into ever-gushing fountains. Ah, that so it were! And then my destiny would be in some sort akin to the watery death of Adrian and Clara. Oh, grief is fantastic! It weaves a web on which to trace the history of its woe from every form and change around. It incorporates itself with all living nature. It finds sustenance in every object. As light, it fills all things, and, like light, it gives its own colors to all. I had wandered in my search to some distance from the spot on which I had been cast, and came to one of those watch-towers, which at stated distances line the Italian shore. I was glad of shelter, glad to find a work of human hands, after I had gazed so long on nature's drear barrenness. So I entered, and ascended the rough winding staircase into the guard-room. So far was fate kind, that no harrowing vestige remained of its former inhabitants. A few planks laid across 2 iron trestles, and strewed with the dried leaves of Indian corn, was the bed presented to me, and an open chest, containing some half-mouldered biscuit, awakened an appetite which perhaps existed before, but of which, until now, I was not aware. Thirst also, violent and parching, the result of the sea-water I had drank, and of the exhaustion of my frame, tormented me. Kind nature had gifted the supply of these wants with pleasurable sensations, so that I, even I, was refreshed and calmed, as I ate of this sorry fare, and drank a little of the sour wine which half filled the flask left in this abandoned dwelling. Then I stretched myself on the bed, not to be disdained by the victim of shipwreck. The earthy smell of the dried leaves was balm to my sense after the hateful odor of seaweed. I forgot my state of loneliness. I neither looked backward nor forward. My senses were hushed to repose. I fell asleep and dreamed of all dear inland scenes, of haymakers, of the shepherd's whistle to his dog, when he demanded his help to drive the flock to fold, of sights and sounds peculiar to my boyhood's mountain life, which I had long forgotten. I awoke in a painful agony, for I fancied the ocean, breaking its bounds, carried away the fixed continent and deep-rooted mountains, together with the streams I loved, the woods, and the flocks. It raged around, with that continued and dreadful roar, which had accompanied the last wreck of surviving humanity. As my waking sense returned, the bare walls of the guard-room closed round me, and the rain pattered against the single window. How dreadful it is to emerge from the oblivion of slumber, and to receive as a good morrow the mute wailing of one's own hapless heart, to return from the land of deceptive dreams to the heavy knowledge of unchanged disaster! Thus was it with me, now and forever. The sting of other griefs might be blunted by time, and even mine yielded sometimes during the day, to the pleasure inspired by the imagination or the senses, but I never look first upon the morning light, but with my fingers pressed tight on my bursting heart, and my soul deluged with the interminable flood of hopeless misery. Now I awoke for the first time in the dead world. I awoke alone, and the dull dirge of the sea, heard even amidst the rain, recalled me to the reflection of the wretch I had become. The sound came like a reproach, a scoff, like the sting of remorse in the soul. I gasped. The veins and muscles of my throat swelled, suffocating me. I put my fingers to my ears, I buried my head in the leaves of my couch. I would have dived to the centre to lose hearing of that hideous moan. What a pitiable, forlorn, disconsolate being I was! My very aspect and garb told the tale of my despair. My hair was matted and wild, my limbs soiled with salt ooze. While at sea I had thrown off those of my garments that encumbered me, and the rain drenched the thin summer clothing I had retained. My feet were bare, and the stunted reeds and broken shells made them bleed. The while I hurried to and fro, now looking earnestly on some distant rock which, islanded in the sands, bore for a moment a deceptive appearance, now with flashing eyes reproaching the murderous ocean for its unutterable cruelty. For a moment I compared myself to that monarch of the waste, Robinson Crusoe. We had been both thrown companionless, he on the shore of a desolate island, I on that of a desolate world. I was rich in the so-called goods of life. If I turned my steps from the near barren scene, and entered any of the earth's million cities, I should find their wealth stored up for my accommodation, clothes, food, books, and a choice of dwelling beyond the command of the princes of former times. Every climate was subject to my selection, while he was obliged to toil in the acquirement of every necessary, and was the inhabitant of a tropical island, against whose heats and storms he could obtain small shelter. Viewing the question thus, who would not have preferred the sybarite enjoyments I would command, the philosophic leisure and ample intellectual resources, to his life of labour and peril? Yet he was far happier than I, for he could hope, nor hope in vain. The destined vessel at last arrived, to bear him to countrymen and kindred, where the events of his solitude became a fireside tale. To none could I ever relate the story of my adversity. No hope had I. He knew that, beyond the ocean which begirt his lonely island, thousands lived whom the sun enlightened when it shone also on him. Beneath the meridian sun and visiting moon, I alone bore human features. I alone could give articulation to thought, and when I slept, both day and night were unbeheld of any. He had fled from his fellows, and was transported with terror at the print of a human foot. I would have knelt down and worshipped the same. The wild and cruel Caribbee, the merciless cannibal, or worse than these, the uncouth brute and remorseless veteran of the vices of civilization, would have been to me a beloved companion, a treasure dearly prized. His nature would be kin to mine, his form cast in the same mould. Human blood would flow in his veins. A human sympathy must link us for ever. It cannot be that I shall never behold a fellow being more. Never, never. Not in the course of years. Shall I wake and speak to none, pass the interminable hours, my soul islanded in the world, a solitary point, surrounded by vacuum? Will day follow day endlessly thus? No, no, a God rules the world. Providence has not exchanged its golden sceptre for an aspic's sting. Away, let me fly from the ocean grave, let me depart from this barren nook, paled in as it is from access by its own desolateness. Let me tread once again the paved towns, step over the threshold of man's dwellings, and most certainly I shall find this thought a horrible vision, a maddening but evanescent dream. I entered Ravenna, the town nearest to the spot whereon I had been cast, before the second sun had set on the empty world. I saw many living creatures, oxen and horses and dogs, but there was no man among them. I entered a cottage, it was vacant. I ascended the marble stairs of a palace, the bats and the owls were nestled in the tapestry. I stepped softly, not to awaken the sleeping town. I rebuked a dog, that by yelping disturbed the sacred stillness. I would not believe that all was as it seemed. The world was not dead, but I was mad. I was deprived of sight, hearing, and sense of touch. I was laboring under the force of a spell which permitted me to behold all sights of earth, except its human inhabitants. They were pursuing their ordinary labors. Every house had its inmate, but I could not perceive them. If I could have